Welcome to my channel, God's Hands on the Wheel of Time. I'm Sammy McKee, and in this episode, I just want to lay out how history repeats. See, we can go and look at small events like the lives of Alexander and Napoleon and find history repeating there. But when it's really interesting is how when you look at large events, entire civilizations, the rise and fall of civilizations, it's repeating every 2,140 years. And so that's what I want to do today, is to really lay out how history is repeating and look at the different events and the rise and fall of civilization, 2,140 years apart. And so where the story, I could pick any point to begin, but where I want to begin is in the righteous world, when the world's kind of at its peak, 2,000 years before now. This was the Roman Republic. Italy was an untouched world. They had a republic there where people had representative government. It was virtually a meritocracy, a land of opportunity. 2,140 years before that, you had the Old Kingdom of Egypt, again the Nile, this new essentially untouched land where the third dynasty emerged and created this period of prosperity in Egypt where civilization was, again, very meritocratic. The pharaoh had a vizier that did most of the governing, like a prime minister, if you will. They had local governments, nomarchs, that were actually basically elected based on merit from the people, or picked, if you will. But nonetheless, it was a land that everybody had opportunity, social mobility. It was egalitarian, much like Rome, the Roman Republic, 2,140 years after that. If you go back 2,140 years before Egypt to Middle Ubaid period in Sumer, it's also a land of opportunity. Sumer during this time, relatively untouched, great ecology, ample fertile lands for people to move into and expand. And it was a very egalitarian culture. It's probably unfair to call it meritocratic, but they didn't really have a strong authoritarian government ruling over them. The people basically got to govern themselves. And so we see during all three of these periods, 2,140 years apart, these very righteous civilizations. Well, around the same time in their history, 2,140 years apart, these societies begin to decline, or corrupt, if you will, into empires. For Rome, this was obvious. Julius Caesar comes along, ends the Republic. Augustus after him and the emperors after him establish a totalitarian dictatorship where the Senate is basically just figureheads that have no power. And these quite debauched emperors who demand that they be worshipped as gods are ruling over the society, abusing the people, all the way across Europe, by the way, ruling the entire world practically at the time. 2,140 years before that, the Old Kingdom of Egypt, after Pepi II, declines into this period of nomarchs who were basically warlords fighting to see who could be the next pharaoh. This is the first intermediate period in Egypt. Eventually along come the Middle Kingdom pharaohs, and they literally are warlord pharaohs that demand the people worship them as living gods. And Egypt during this time is nothing like it was in the Old Kingdom, and they are ruling the world through military arm and military strength, with influence stretching as far away as Phoenicia and the Aegean. And 2,140 years before that, you had the Uruk period of Sumer come along. It displaces the terminal Ubaid period when the Ubaid culture began to decline and corrupt, and then we get the Old Uruk period, as they call it, where priest kings are ruling over the society now. They have much more concentrated wealth amongst the hands of the elites as compared to the Ubaid period. Now, with all cultures that are corrupt and evil, eventually there's a fall. And whether it's the Roman Empire, the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, or this Uruk period that stretched across Mesopotamia, you see an invaders come in. In the case of the Uruk period, it was the Eastern Semitic peoples that first arrived in northern Mesopotamia and displaced Uruk influence there. This is the same thing we see 2,140 years later with the Indo-European migrations that move into the Aegean and also into Anatolia and displace the Egyptian influence there. Meanwhile, just like in Sumer, the Uruk period transitions into the Middle Uruk during this time. The Egyptian civilization, the Middle Kingdom ends. There's a brief second intermediate period, and then there's the New Kingdom of Egypt. And the New Kingdom of Egypt is just like the Byzantine Empire for the Romans. It's this continuation of Egyptian culture and civilization, again, under the same type of warlord pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, but they don't have the influence over the Aegean and Anatolia due to the Hittites and the Messenians. 2,140 years after that, you have the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. These Germanic tribes have moved in. They've set up their own kingdoms there, and the Byzantine Empire is basically now isolated to the Aegean. This is the first wave of barbarians. There then comes a barbarian empire, if you will, for the Germanic tribes. This is Charlemagne, the Carolingian Empire that stretched across Western Europe, could rival the Byzantine Empire. 2,140 years before that, we see the Mycenaean civilization coalesce into an empire under Atreus and later Agamemnon that, could rival the new kingdom of Egypt at the time. 2,140 years before that, you had these East Semitic city-states that are emerging that can rival Uruk in power. Well, that period, the late Bronze Age period and the early Middle Ages, it ends all at the same time, 2,140 years apart, with the second wave of barbarians. For Charlemagne, for the early Middle Ages, this is the invasion of the Vikings. They come in and they're literally destroying civilization, ushering in later on what we call the High Middle Ages, but a break in civilization there. They even attack the Byzantines. Same thing can be seen 2,140 years before that, the invasions of the Sea Peoples. We call them the Dorians in Greece. They collapsed the Mycenaean civilization, again, just like the Vikings collapsed the Carolingian Empire. They also caused the Bronze Age collapse throughout the Fertile Crescent. They even fight battles against the new kingdom of Egypt, just like the Vikings attack Constantinople. This ushers in the Greek Dark Ages. And so 2,140 years before that, we have the Semitic peoples appear in the Levant. They set up city-states like Ebla, a new period in Fertile Crescent history that ushers in the early Bronze Age. The Uruk period eventually ends and brings in new periods like the Kingdom of Kish, which were actually Semitic. And that's one thing to mention as well. Even 2,140 years apart, you see the Egyptian civilization fall under the influence of the Libyans. The same thing could be seen with the Latin Empire during the Fourth Crusade, where you have the Byzantine civilization get replaced by these crusaders who are of Germanic and Viking heritage. And so that's the thing we're seeing, 2,140 years apart, basically a dark age begin. This dark age, of course, ends eventually. For Greece, this is the start of the Archaic period and eventually the Classical period. Worth noting, this is a new civilization. It's a coalescence of Egyptian, Mycenaean, Minoan, Phoenician influence that comes in, and now we have Greek civilization appear. Eventually, Greek civilization gives birth to the Roman Republic, right? And so here we are back at the start of the story. The same thing can be seen 2,140 years after that, as the High Middle Ages gives way to the Late Middle Ages, eventually the Renaissance, in this new civilization in Europe, if you will, that's a mix of Viking, Germanic, Latin influences, even with some Muslim influences, all in Europe and Western culture, Western civilization that gives way to the Enlightenment and eventually the formation of the United States of America. 2,140 years before Greece, you look at the Levant. What we had was the Eastern and the Western Semitic-speaking peoples mixing and coalescing with the remnants of the Uruk civilization, all coming together and forming this new early Bronze Age civilization in the Levant. And what did they influence? The formation of the Third Dynasty and the Old Kingdom of Egypt, 2,140 years apart. And so you can see there's this thread, and it starts in Sumer. It spreads out into Mesopotamia as the Uruk civilization under this empire, right? It was originally the Ubaid, which was just, and eventually became the Uruk Empire under the priest kings. That spreads into the Fertile Crescent, eventually dominates the whole Fertile Crescent, but it's displaced by the Semitic-speaking peoples who come in. That enters like a dark age and begins a new civilization, a new culture, if you will, the early Bronze Age. Eventually that spreads to the Old Kingdom of Egypt and the Nile. And in the Nile River Delta, we have a new civilization emerge in a land that is fresh ecologically. And then that spreads into the Aegean. And eventually you have barbarians come in, the Indo-Europeans, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, and finally the Sea Peoples, and they usher in a new civilization there, the Greek civilization. It's a coalescing of all of those. And from there, that spreads to Rome. Rome spreads to Western Europe. And then from there, we have the Germanic tribes come in. And then eventually the Vikings, starting in the High Middle Ages, and the new European civilization that's a mix of these Latin, Germanic and Viking influences. And then finally, it spreads to America and the United States of America. So 2,140 years apart, we see this thread of civilization, and I call it Western civilization because it slowly spreads west, right? Out of Sumer to Egypt, to Rome, and finally to America. And so when we understand on this macro scale this process that's underway, we can start to think about, okay, well, what processes are influencing this 2,140-year timeline? And that's where we can really start to dig into astrology, to the idea that seasons are playing out with these dark ages and these rebirths and these lands of opportunity. And eventually we're going to even get into looking at the Bible, looking at Genesis, Exodus, and of course the modern times, more recent times, and all of this making sense in terms of how God's hands are literally impacting civilization and controlling the wheel of time and dictating where humanity is headed, and that there actually is not just control, but stability, purpose, a reason for everything that is happening, that even when it looks like barbarians have invaded civilization and destroyed it, there's a purpose to it all. And so that's what later videos are going to talk about, the part 2 and part 3 of this series, this introductory series on history repeating. And so I hope this helped you understand my research, what I've discovered, how history is repeating on a macro scale, this idea of Western civilization, about the rise and fall of civilization. Like and subscribe. Check out my next 2 videos, and God's blessings to all. I just really appreciate you coming today and spending this time with me. Thanks.